Welcome back to FNN News, Finfine News Network. I am your host, Cybele. Today we have a very special guest on the program, Najat Hamza. Najat Hamza is a human rights advocate and Oromo activist based in Minneapolis, and she was appointed as an international public relations officer for the Oromo Liberation Army. Najat, thank you very much for coming on here and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Cybele.
So firstly, I wanted to ask you if you could give us an update regarding the OLA's military progress. One thing that we've noticed is that in Ethiopia, political power seems to be very concentrated in the capital, and the capital seems to be sort of a lifeline for the Abiy regime. However, the OLA operations seem more concentrated in zones farther away from the capital. So I'm wondering, where is the OLA in their progress towards Finfine, the capital, and what can the OLA do to dislodge the Prosperity Party from Finfine?
Thank you. So our operations are going in all fronts. We do operate from the periphery and moving towards the center, and that has been not by design, but it was just the geopolitical location and the way things unfolded, and where we usually have our forces present. So currently, we're more concentrated toward the center and moving towards Finfine, and those operations are ongoing, and we are gaining ground day by day. So that's what's happening, and we are not the only force in town, marching towards Finfine. So we have a lot of coalition forces who are doing the same. However, there are struggles along the way with Abiy Ahmed's, forces and here and there. So there is a sporadic fighting. So we're going both horizontally and vertically to advance towards Finfine, but the objective remains the same. It's the liberation of Oromo and Auromia, and that's what the OLA is currently busy doing. So those delays towards the center, marching on Finfine, is delayed because we are engaged in fights within the periphery as we move towards the center.
Mm-hmm. So we've seen in Ethiopia that groups dominating the country for so long don't seem to show much interest in meeting Oromos halfway, and the political space seems to have been very closed for Oromos. Meanwhile, we've heard calls openly for the removal of the constitutional right to self-determination for Oromia. So what would you see is left for the Oromo people in these circumstances, and how can they continue to work towards a universal right to self-determination and self-rule?
See, the problem, Oromos, we don't want to be met halfway. What we want is to rightfully exist on our land and to realize the aspiration of our people and to stop this subjugation that has cost us a lot for generations. And that's what we want to put an end to. And so various groups have interest in Oromia, which is the most bountiful, resourceful area that they're really fighting over. So as an indigenous community of that land, you're always kept on the periphery, because if your rights are realized and your determination is realized, that then those resources are kept within our borders, and that our people will be beneficiaries of those resources and live in freedom. And so that would mean a loss for those who wants to conquer our resources but have no interest in our personhood, our identity, our culture, our tradition, or our existence as people. So that's what's in conflict. Nobody wants to meet Oromo people halfway, or either even listen to our needs and what we're asking for. Whether the Constitution is amended or not, we're going to move forward to realizing those dreams, to be able to say that this is our homeland and that these things need to end with this generation. Because if you see, the successive Ethiopian regimes have never been kind to my people, and it's not kind to my people now. And that unfolds in so many different tiers. One is economic subjugation, the other one is cultural genocide, and kind of taking all of our resources, but they don't want anything to do with our rights or our personhood, like I said. So these are the dynamics at play, and we understand that. That's why the struggle was first started, is that we knew things like this cannot be settled by negotiation. It was tried and failed many times, and 2018 is an example of where Oromo youth rose up to demand these rights in a peaceful manner, but was met with unimaginable, brutal, and ugly violence just because they asked for those rights. So we know that time and time again, we have tried all the available tools to secure our rights and to self-determination, our rights to exist on our land, our rights to have our culture preserved for generations to come, to just exist as people, really. So that has been tried and failed, not on our side, but the Ethiopian empire have no space for Oromos in that way. So what is left for Oromo people to do is to defend their territory and to bring those dreams to fruition by any means necessary. And that's what you see, in the current 2-3 years, because the youth realize that peaceful resistance and asking for political inclusivity in that country doesn't really pan out. And that's why they have come to the area where we got to pick up arms to defend our liberation, our aspiration, and our right to exist on our land.
Mhm. We've seen recently the TPLF, of course, withdrawing from some other areas of the country, and then Abiy announcing what he calls a national inclusive dialogue, in kind of a gesture to, act like he's trying to come to some sort of agreement or peace. And then we saw a few token releases of some Oromo political prisoners that had been held essentially without trial for long periods of time throughout this conflict in the country. But would you say that those are real moves towards a real peace dialogue? What's missing from this national inclusive dialogue, and what is the OLA and what are Oromos demanding be included in this to actually fully come to an agreement?
So things that are coming out of the Prosperity Party and Abiy Ahmed and his leadership do not have any merits at this time, because they have promised time and time again for Oromo people and all the other peoples of that country that are in a similar way, inclusivity, equal rights, self administration, and all the other rights that were already guaranteed under the current Ethiopian constitution. So this is no different. It's a sham. A national inclusive dialogue cannot take place by the persons that are responsible for the distraction and violence that has been, abundant on that land for the last 3 years. So who is involved in that is the Prosperity Party in its different phases. So the main stakeholders who can actually determine the fate of that country, whether or not that country can be an inclusive country, and as an Oromo have our rights to, if we so choose, which is what we're fighting for, to have a self-determination, is not included in there. So this is just another attempt by Prosperity Party to kind of say to the world, look, we're holding this national dialogue and we're kind of taking a step towards the right direction, when we know that is farther from the truth. You
Mhm.
know this because the escalation of war, violence, and many other things that are happening on the ground hasn't stopped. In fact, they are drumming up rhetoric right now to kind of prepare to bring those war and destruction and violence to Oromia, as a way to silence our people and also go after Oromo Liberation Army. So this does not look like a precondition for a peaceful sit down between people and parties and stakeholders that can actually deliver some sort of sustainable change. So this is no different. Like I said, and I know that TDF has withdrawn and they have their own reasons for that, but our forces continue to go forward because even though we have a common goal as an uprooting prosperity party and Abiy Ahmed and his leadership, we also have individual goals that we need to realize as a separate entity. So with that said, who is included in the national dialogue that they're drumming up? No one other than the current party and its subsidiaries, really. That's what it is. And it's just another sham to, in an attempt to kind of confuse the population, one, and two, to put on a brave face in front of the international community when they know that is not the case. And so, therefore, it's a null on arrival. What are we calling for? We're calling for a genuine, inclusive national dialogue where a certain party is involved, where all the demands of the people are put on the table, and that those demands are met without compromise. And they're not willing to do that.
Mm-hmm. FNN has been reporting recently on a pretty disturbing trend we've seen of essentially widespread killings of civilians in Oromia. One of the ones that generated the most news was the Karyu massacre that happened a few months ago. So I wanted to ask, the OLA recently put out a press release about Oromophobia, was the term they used, being present within the country. So what does that look like to Oromos on the ground living there? How does this take place in, cultural dimensions, in society, and in politics for Oromos?
So this is an age-old story, right? Demonizing Oromo Liberation Army and those individuals who actually uphold those aspirations of our people and the brighter future that we imagine for our population is nothing new. Successive regimes have done that. We have lived through that. My generation have lived through that multiple times, and this is no different. I'm glad that you brought up the Karyu massacre. If you remember, all of their medias, all of the government-sponsored slash government medias were saying that Oromo Liberation Army was the one that massacred these Bagadas in the area, when we knew by their own accounts that wasn't the case. So that was another way of framing OLA, demonizing OLA, in front of trying to demonize OLA in front of the international community, as well as like kind of bring fear into our population so that people can kind of be numb and not be involved in this struggle to self-determination. And this is always has been the goal. And attacking civilians, as sad as it is part of their narrative to frame OLA as this force that's out to get you. Like Oromo, not I will go farther than say Oromophobia is a lot more like there is this monster out there in the woods. He's coming for you. Like that's basically the narrative that successive Ethiopian regimes, this included, have kind of disseminated among the population. So they have the fear that if these forces ever came to be, that we would just be, massacring civilians. When in reality, OLA has a very specific goal in mind, which is the liberation of our land and our people, and that we have never waged war against populations of any kind. Because, in fact, there are populations, like I said earlier, who have the same fate as we do. And they have aligned themselves with this force to bring their own liberation and justice and equality and inclusivity to their own land. And we have no reason to attack or do any harm to a population, because our objective is to uproot an entity that has been violent from the beginning, that have cost us lives and limbs and disruptions of war and ugliness on our land. And it has nothing to do with the people. And so this is just a broader propaganda piece that they have done in the past through different regimes and continuing on today to kind of vilify the struggle itself so that people could stay away from it, so that we could lose our base, so that therefore then Oromos are subjugated once more. But this generation is a very self-aware generation. We know what is and what isn't. So that is not going to be successful. It's just sad that those civilians are massacred for this ugly propaganda war.
Mhm. We've discussed a little bit here on the show the involvement of Eritrean troops in the war, and the relationship that Eritrea and the Eritrean government has to Abiy Ahmed's regime right now. We've seen some stories come out of Eritrean troops even fighting in this war disguised as Ethiopian National Defense Force troops. So, what are the implications of this? And what does Isaiah Safwerki hope to gain from this partnership with Abiy? What are the dimensions here?
Well, that's for Abiy and Afwerki to answer, right? We never knew what those agreements were. It was never publicized, as far as I'm concerned. It was never explained to the um, Oromia, or the Ethiopia in general, to the people of the world, what those were to this day. But it's very easy to understand, standing now in the point where we are in, what those things were. He was probably promised a dissemination of TPLF, and because they pose a certain threats to his power. It could be that, it could be any number of things. It could be economic gains, or I don't know. But the point is, it's a bloody marriage that has cost people their lives, livelihood, and destruction in a degree that we haven't seen in recent modern history in that country. And um, to not say that lightly, like, if you really think about it, it's a country that is inviting a foreign power into their own border to attack their own civilians. And those are the same party, the Prosperity Party, who turn around and say, we're doing this to protect our sovereignty. Now, if a sovereign nation doesn't allow another nation to come in and massacre its own citizenship, that's a contradiction right there for the world to see. And anybody who is supporting TDF, Tigray, or any other force really trying to uproot the Prosperity Party, you're labeled as anti-nationalist. You're not like proud of being Ethiopian, or whatever else that they can come up with, citing sovereignty. Well, the government itself is in violation of its own so-called sovereignty of that country by inviting these forces. And now I know, and we know that by fact, they have been marching in and out of Oromia as well, causing destruction. Civilians are attacked, and we have been saying that to the world and to them. But they have denied, like you remember in the initial part of the war in Tigray, they have denied it until it became so clear that they can no longer hide the truth, and they had to come out and acknowledge that fact. So that's what it is. We're talking about people who stop at nothing to invite a foreign, like, entity into a sovereign, so-called sovereign nation to attack its own citizens for a political gain. So nothing is off limits. That also shows the internationalization of that war, because now another country is involved, and we know that Eritrea is not the only one either.
Mhm,
So yeah, that's where we are.
mhm. And talk a little bit about the implication of this conflict with respect to Oromo women's rights. We've seen some reporting on this very disturbing trend of a weaponized use of sexual assault in this conflict. So, what are the challenges facing Oromo, and I would also include Tigrayan women, and how are Oromo women participating in this struggle?
So one of the most disturbing things that came out of the war in Tigray, and is still to some parts going on, is the weaponization of rape as a weapon of war against women and children even. And things escalated fast, and people brought this to light. Many Tigrayan activists, Oromo activists, human rights advocates were sounding an alarm. However, the Ethiopian government, like always, came out and denied it. And at some point, Abiy even made a mockery of these women, that they're only raped by men, and our men are raped by guns, and so therefore, how dare you, raise this issue? So this is the most pathetic and ugly things that came out of that war, and we were aware of what these forces are capable of and why this is happening. This wasn't happening because it was an isolated incident here and there, or or some sort of a person or persons losing their personal inhibition. This was a designed systemic rape that was put there to kind of mess with the identity of Tigrayan people. So by definition, that is one of the points of genocide, is using women's bodies to kind of disable their sense of identity, their sense of pride in that country. But what did that do? That fueled generations of young people who have never touched a gun in their life to rise up against that and to defend the honor of their country, the honor of their mothers or sisters and neighbors, and it just inflamed their sense of pride even further. So it did not achieve what it was designed to do like they hoped. However, it is the most ugliest thing that anyone could really be involved in. And so, knowing that, if they are now drumming a war drum towards Oromia, we're well aware of what the consequence would be for Oromo women, and that we're going to protect our population as much as we can. And OLA has been involved in various fights doing just that. On the other hand, many Oromo women, educated Oromo women who otherwise would have a brighter future if we had peace and land and the right to exist, decided to join OLA, to pick up arms, to defend their population and their homeland. So that's where we are. And then those of us who live abroad, many parts of the world have been voicing the alarm, advocating, getting together, doing what we can to kind of avert that kind of distraction on our population and our land. But we have yet to see what's going to happen.
Mhm. Another item that FNN has reported on recently has been some of the really inhumane conditions that Oromo migrants are facing who are seeking refuge in multiple countries, most recently including Saudi Arabia. We reported on a story about Oromo migrants in just horrible conditions in Saudi Arabian detention centers and caught up in that country's conflict with the Houthis. So I'm wondering, what are those struggles that Oromo migrants and refugee seekers are facing right now? What can governments do to be more welcoming to them? And why have these certain governments been so hostile and thrown these asylum seekers into detention centers, essentially?
That's a very complicated question to answer. One can think our population who live in Saudi Arabia are very supportive of Oromo struggle. They have been supportive in so many different ways, financially, ideally, in every way possible. And it's not lost on us that this is happening to them when we have an embassy in that country who claims to represent all of the citizens of Oromia and Ethiopia in general. And you see that there are not, any steps that are taken to address these issues genuinely. And in his latest address to the parliament, Abiy Ahmed actually flat out said that they have no proof that these people are citizens of Ethiopia, or that they're not dangerous. Or he also insinuated that there are dangerous people that infiltrated and that somehow traveled to Saudi Arabia and now trying to use this as a way to get back inside the country to cause destruction, which is delusional because these people are there, some of them because of political reasons, like always, as an Oromo and other people who wanted to fight for their rights and couldn't, and so they had to flee and find home there. And the others are economic migrants who are there to kind of help themselves and help their families and communities. So to associate them with violence as a way to disregard their plea right now is inhumane, and it's one of the hallmark of Abiy Ahmed is that he lacks sympathy in the basic level. And we see children, women, young folks who are there trying to do what they can to push this life forward, being in the way that they are. Some are dying, some are treated in a way that I can't even explain. And he could do this. He could do something positive and to bring them home. But instead, he has decided to look the other way. In fact, it looks like he wants them there. If you look at the description. So for us, we have been pushing from here. Different various Oromo groups have been advocating on their behalf, kind of tapping on United Nations shoulders and a bunch of other organizations that can maybe ensure their safety and maybe grant them home or wherever they need to be from that situation. And so that's what we're doing. So there is no hope from the Ethiopian government side to help these people, because they are actually, it looks like they're working in tandem with the Saudi Arabian government to keep him in the condition that they are in.
Mhm. We've seen that the Western media coverage of what has been going on in Ethiopia and also international media coverage has really heavily focused on Tigray, basically, and on the conflict in that region. So I'm wondering, what would be a more proper international response to this conflict, to give full respect and recognition of what Oromos are going through, and what could Western media, international media learn about how to more accurately cover what's going on?
So we always have said that Tigray was an extension of war in Oromia. Prior to the Tigrayan war, or the war in Tigray, Oromia was already under siege in so many different levels. Whether it's a crackdown on the youth leadership, the Gero movement, any prominent Oromo political persons or groups or parties, and economic like subjugations of different kinds, and things were already happening. People were disappearing, so all of this were going on as we were screaming, and then there was drums of war because TPLF decided to stand up to Abiy Ahmed, and he kind of shifted focus for a second to kind of concentrate their efforts. Remember, they said that it was a law and order operation and that it was supposed to only take 2 weeks to squash the TPLF and come back to the main source, which is Oromia, where they wanted to kind of decimate our voice, silence our voice, both at home and abroad, to kind of finalize their idea of what they wanted to see Ethiopia look like in the next in the near future. And we know the country we fought for, our youth fought for, is not that. None of our demands were met. It was pushed aside, and it kind of moved away from there. And they were just trying to build this other vision, the imperial vision of Ethiopia by any means necessary, and that became very evident. And that was the first step of war that Abiy Ahmed, kind of unfolded. And then Tigray became this huge story because of the amount of destruction and the mere violence that unfolded in that. And the world kind of likes sensationalization, sense, you know, they like that because it kind of brought a lot of attention into the media. And also, what was happening was far more destructive and grand in scale, based on when in comparison what was happening in Oromia. And so they usually focus things in like small little packets, which is not how you paint a complicated picture of Oromia and Ethiopia in general. So the Western journalists kind of latch onto specific stories. This is happening here, and this is happening that there, and this is what's going on right now, and instead of what caused this to begin with and what is the underlying issue. Some journalists have gone deeper, but mostly they kind of superficially cover what is happening day to day and fail to see the bigger picture of why this war is going on. We know that this war is not just about Tigray, it's a war on the right to self-determination. It's a war to get rid of federations that federalism that exists right now. It's a war to kind of mush all of that, silence all of those voices, and kind of build the vision of Ethiopia Abiy and his cronies are wishing to have. So that's what the war is for, and that's why he's doing that. So mostly the Western journalists and media fail to see this picture time and time again. Like I said, some are credited to go deeper, but that's what has been happening. And when it comes to the Oromo voice, I know the West is also a little bit iffy about that, because they always talk about keeping the integrity of Ethiopia above the right to self-determination of Oromo people. So that could also be part of the factor why they kind of tend to ignore our voices and our demands a little to the side. However, we're here, we're assertive, we're stronger than ever, and we're going to push this until the world sees it for what it is.
Mhm. So you have an incredible story about coming from Oromia, being forced to leave your homeland and coming to the United States. So I wanted to ask, do you see the conditions that drove you out of there still present in some ways? And then also in terms of, other Oromo immigrants, both to the US and other countries, how are those people using their struggle to take action now, participating still in what's going on in Oromia and advocating for other Oromo people?
Yeah, so the conditions that existed when I was a child, midnight raids, arbitrary arrests, random killings, disappearance, just in my neighborhood, right and left, like 1 mile to my house, is what we grew up with until they came for my dad, and then we had to leave. Um, Unfortunately, this isn't a unique story, nor is the worst one. It's just my story. But there are others that can talk about horrific conditions that they have escaped, and jails they were taken to, tortures they have survived, and both men and women, and young and old. This has been our story, and this is why we have this burning desire to put an end to it. As sad as it was for us to leave and to find safety elsewhere in the world, we're scattered everywhere, and that was the reason, right? Different generations left at different times. We decided that this generation has to put an end to it because we know that it was so, even though it's like a different in degrees, these conditions still exist today. It existed throughout the Oromo protests. Prior to that, since we started struggling against the Ethiopian empire, that is basically was built on our subjugation, and so it can be different. It can maybe have a different way, but at the end of the day, it's a suppression of Oromo voice, identity, culture, pride, a sense of freedom that we crave so much as people, and that we are willing to pay anything to get. Um, for the question that you asked, how are we using these experiences to help the struggle is exactly that, using our voice in our newfound home to speak truth to power, to organize, to use various skills that we have obtained since, to put it to a good use. It is the call of this generation to do everything necessary that this cycle stops with us. I don't want to pass this to my child who is born in Minnesota. I don't want any children in that country, Oromo or not, to see hunger, to see economic subjugation, to see their identity, put in such a low regard that they're ashamed to call themselves by their names, to be proud of who they are. All of that needs to end, because at the end of the day, we are all people, and every person on earth has a basic right to just exist and to be proud of who they are, and to be not like, to not be targeted because you want your truths to be heard, or that you deserve to live and die on your land. And that is how we are giving back. And we are a resilient community regardless of what we have been through. We have never given up hope, nor do we give up our aspiration to freedom.
Well, Najat, with those very powerful words, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. We would be happy to have you back. Thanks for coming and talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our audience for watching. Once again, we are FNN News, Finfine News Network, and I am your host, Cybele.